All right.
Hello, everyone. Super excited to be here. We're just going to make sure that the live is actually running in a couple of the different platforms. It says we're live. LinkedIn likes to play nicely sometimes, and sometimes they don't. But I'm super excited to be here with Krista Wilson, and we're going to talk about how to cultivate inclusive leadership skills, like inclusivity as a leadership skill, and build equitable cultures. So, Krista, what does that mean? It sounds super interesting. Like, I need to know this, but what does that actually mean?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll tell you that it's a term that almost starts to mean nothing because it's almost jargon. We hear the term inclusive culture or equitable culture, and we don't really break it down. So it's one of my favorite things to talk about. So basically, I like to say that inclusive and equitable workplaces are just a workplace where people feel valued, they feel respected, and they have equal access and opportunities to get the resources and the support that they need so that they can be successful at work. Sometimes depending on the environment, I might also say that it's a healthy workplace. So basically you can go to work and not feel threatened or harmed. That would be great too when we talk about, workplace well-being. Some of our companies have a little bit of ways to go there, but that's what I think about when I talk about an equitable and inclusive workplace.
Okay, awesome. So when you're thinking about an equitable and inclusive workplace, what is the role of the leader to make sure that workplace meets these criteria? Like, as a leader, how can I make sure I'm doing this right?
Yeah, well, I think it's a couple of things. I think when I have consulted with organizations, big and small, sometimes there's this idea that, well, equity and inclusion happens because we created a policy. So we just legislate these kinds of organizations to happen. But actually, the way that these organizations get created, these equitable and inclusive organizations, is because we as leaders help create and shape that culture. I want to say in the last 4 years, there's been so many articles that have come out, so much research that has come out that has said, really, it starts at the top. So we in leadership roles have a responsibility to actually shape and help build the kind of cultures we want to see. So here are, I would say, maybe 3 or 4, let me count them out, ways that I think leaders can help create inclusive workplaces. I think the first is we model inclusive behavior. So that looks like when we have a meeting, and this actually just happened to me last year, when we have a mixed group, maybe we have new hires, we actually ask people when we come onto Teams or to Zoom to add their gender pronouns to their Zoom name. Or when we start a meeting, we ask people, do you have any access needs or supports that I can offer as the lead of this meeting to make sure that you are supported and that you can participate in ways that feel good and supportive? So we model inclusive behavior, right? That's one great way that leaders can create an inclusive workplace, big picture, and then also in their team meetings. The second one is that we can create and set and uphold DEI policies and objectives. So if our organization has a big DEI policy, big DEI strategy, that's got to unfold on our team levels too. So we get to think about, okay, we've got this big strategy on our website. How do I actually have that come alive on my team, in my team spaces? So it could look like, for example, I have a client and what we sat down to do and said, okay, this plan for our organization is very big. But on our team, we don't actually have team culture agreements. So how do we make this big organizational plan come alive? Well, what did it look like in our day-to-day activity? So that's what a leader can do to make big plans that feel real big for, say a multinational organization feel real for the team. I think a third is, how do we resource and coach our team members? So I want to offer that gone are the days where, we're quote unquote the boss. I want to invite anyone that is a people leader to think of yourself as a coach. Whether or not you're like me and you have a coaching credential, I want to invite you to think of yourself as a coach. A coach asks themselves, how do I help people live into their highest potential? And in order to do that, that's an equity strategy because everyone has different potential. They're going to have different strengths, abilities, and needs. So we have to actually tailor our coaching strategy to each person. That's equity in practice. So that's another thing that leaders can do. And then here's a fourth bonus. We got to promote open communication and accountability. And that actually starts with us. So one thing that leaders can do that, and I can tell you, I can't name names to protect the innocent, but I have so many wonderful clients from the C-suite to senior directors who they're good people, but maybe they've made mistakes, right? They've operated in ways that were outside of how they wanted to be with their people. And they knew it. They maybe even told me, Krista, I didn't want to be like that with my team, or I wish I hadn't have said that. And then they just tell it to me, but they don't actually tell it to their people. So they don't hold themselves accountable to this inclusive or healthy or supportive way that they want to show up at work. And so you can't hold your people accountable if you can't hold yourself accountable. And that actually squashes open lines of communication. So I think those are four, just top of mind, four really critical ways that a leader can show up that can promote an inclusive and equitable, not only team culture, but there's a ripple effect that can really transcend and move throughout the whole organization.
So it's interesting you say that because I was a caregiver for my mother. And when she started to lose mobility, everything was in a wheelchair. So I realized it wasn't until I had to get her from place to place to place did I realize how inaccessible so many things are.
Yeah.
But that wasn't my worldview at all until I had to get my mother around. And then I would consciously be aware, like, there's no way she can go here with us because there's no elevator. There's no way she can travel here with us. But I didn't think about that until that became a part of my world. So I feel like when it comes to inclusivity and including all diverse cultures or backgrounds and all those things, leaders could not intentionally prevent creating this inclusive workplace.
Yeah.
Because they haven't been exposed or they haven't been educated. So how can, as a leader, how can I make sure I don't prevent an inclusive workplace if that's just not my experience?
Yeah, I have this wheel. I keep this at my desk all the time because I never know when I'm gonna need it. So I'm gonna use a term that I lovingly use inside my membership program, but I call it the zone of cluelessness. Okay, when I say zone of cluelessness, what I mean is we're often cluelessness. We often have no idea about the needs or the barriers that other groups experience until we are connected, we have close proximity to those groups. It doesn't have to be like that, though. We don't have to meet a disabled person or become disabled to be able to think about how do we design accessibility and inclusiveness for disabled folks. Same thing. We don't have to, everybody can't become Black, but we don't have to know Black people and their experiences to then create workplaces that are not anti-Black. But what we do have to do is to move outside of our zone of cluelessness, right? And build that awareness. So I share this, I know it's hard to see, but this is a wheel that I use with my team and with my clients and inside my membership programs. And on the outside of that circle, there are 18 different social identities. And within those 18 identities, what I offer people are, here are the different ways in which people experience harm and marginalization. And then I ask people, which of these might be you? Right? Which of these identities are you experiencing maybe harm or marginalization? And then also think about your team. Of your team, who has these 18 identities that you may know of, right? Some of these might be identities that aren't clear. So I think the first thing that I would offer is we've got to be clear where our own zones of cluelessness are and to become more aware, right? So that we can be designing it with intention. There's something else I would also mention, and it also has to do with this idea of being cluelessness too. And I say this again with love, with love. I have a client, and so I share the story, and if they see this, they'll maybe know that I'm talking about them, but it's also in love. That sometimes we, and I can be guilty of this too. We move in spaces where we are more of a, I'm going to say, a rain cloud, sometimes a hurricane, than a sunshine. And what I mean by that is we are not aware. So we are clueless about the impact of our words and emotions. And when we are not emotionally regulated as leaders, it's that thing where when you have a meeting, particularly when it's in person, and everyone in that room is like, oh, here they come. Or, oh, we have to meet in person. Is so-and-so going to be there? And anybody who is watching this knows that person. And unfortunately, some of y'all, if you say, I don't know that I've ever had that feeling, it might be you, with love. That's this idea of emotional self-regulation. And so often when clients hire me to do employee engagement surveys, when they've hired me to do focus groups or restorative justice and harm reduction work, it's been about this. Leaders who are chipping away at the company well-being or sense of inclusion because leaders are just not aware of how their unregulated emotions are impacting their team. So I think this is how we, prevent the creation of inclusive workplaces. Nevertheless, things like, the obvious, we allow discriminatory practices to happen because we feel unskilled to be able to address these identity-based harms that happen, or, we don't have the skills to help team members do better when identity-based harm starts to show up, or we don't have the skills to facilitate open communication around these issues around diversity and inclusion.
Okay, so I'm going to go off script for a second, just because I have a question that I want you to go deeper on that if you can.
Yeah.
If I am a leader and I don't recognize I have this deficit of emotional intelligence, or I don't see it,
yeah,
then how, and maybe my team says something to me, maybe my team goes to HR. How can I increase my level of awareness of my own ignorance that I don't know what I don't know?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I'm not the only one that realizes I didn't have this worldview until I had that experience with my mother in a wheelchair. And like, how many other, you just listed 18 how would you call it?
Social identities.
Social identities, which I didn't know that was a thing. So I'm thinking race, I'm thinking gender, I'm thinking different abilities. I know that I don't know these things.
Mm-hmm.
So what can I do to be more aware as a leader, or even as an employee, just as a human, of my own limitations?
Yeah, there's two answers to this question. The first, I'm going to talk about identity, and then there's emotion part. So in terms of identity, here's the first tactic. And these are things that we actually build inside of both of my membership programs because they're so foundational. So the first thing that I would offer is, it doesn't really matter the jargon. So anytime you meet with a coach or a trainer, we always have titles and names for stuff. So I called it social identities, but you all know what these are. It's essentially what makes you you? What are the characteristics that make you you? So the first tactic of this is to actually list that out. So where are you from geographically, right? I'm from Georgia. Okay, so put that down. I'm from North Carolina. I have black hair. I have freckles. Okay, but then why do I have freckles? Oh, I have some Irish lineage. Why? Oh, because my family was also enslaved. Okay, I'm Black. I have an episodic disability, which means my disabilities can come and go. And so at times I have accessibility needs that have to be factored in. So start to list out, what are your own identities? What are your own characteristics? That's important because generally our characteristics are the things that we're super aware of. So I know when I go into a space, I'm aware of, is this place supportive of women or not? Is it supportive of Black people or not? Is this place accessible for disabled folks or not? That's top of mind because those are my identities. That's where we're in our zone of awareness. Our zone of cluelessness is the identities that aren't ours. So how we start to build those skills is to think about, okay, I can look into a room and see difference because I'm not colorblind. I see difference. So I can start to say, okay, how are we pro or supportive of Asian folk, Pacific Islander folk? Are we a space that is neuro-inclusive, right? For all the neurodiversity that we may have in our workplace, right? So I can start to think about what are the other kinds of people, abilities, skills, language, learning types that could be present in this space. If they could be present, how do I then design practices so that they feel included? So this is just an example of how do we intentionally design. Now, I have had leaders say, well, I don't want to go through all this extra effort to do, inclusive design for, neurodivergent people. I don't even know if we have any neurodivergent people here. Is that really worth the effort? And to that, I told my client two things. One, I guarantee that you have neurodivergent people here because that's such a wide category of folks. But also, if you design for all types of people, all people will benefit. For example, I know that if we design and we have meetings where we tell folks, hey, you can be camera optional for this part of the meeting, that will benefit folks that maybe are prone to migraines just as much as it benefits folks who are maybe have sensory needs, right? So that neuro-inclusive design benefits multiple groups of people, or people who maybe have low blood sugar and need to eat at that 3 p.m. mark and want to go off camera so they can eat because they have, dietary needs. That benefits and includes those folks too. So that's just an example about, designing for others. And then the second thing I just want to say real quick, because your question was compounded. You asked about, well, what about leaders if you don't actually know about your emotions or how you're showing up? And I would say that you're actually talking to this client who we were talking with. She's actually a wonderful person. I've been working with the C-suite leader for years. At the time of our first engagement, wasn't aware of how they moved and how they were showing up and how they were impacting their team, was one in which their director team and staff, the feedback was this C-suite leader doesn't listen. They're not open to feedback. They use harsh words. They're rude. And I was thinking, this C-suite leader, I can see that they're a good person. And they're an East Coaster and they speak fast and the language is shorter. I have family that's from, New York, East Coast. So it's just a different way of communicating. It's cultural too. So I realized that there needed to be almost like a 360-degree feedback loop with this leader to also give them the feedback. So to answer the question succinctly, here's what I would offer. Most of us don't know how we're landing or impacting other people. So the first is, for leaders, we've got to actually open ourselves up for feedback. And that's super scary. So maybe first start with one person that you trust, who won't give you feedback to hurt you, but who will give you feedback because they care about you. The second thing is I would offer to start to keep a log for 1 week. And in that log, start to jot down when you were activated or triggered at work. What I mean by that is what peeved you off, what made you angry, right? What really got you frustrated? And then log what was the conversations or the vibe or the interactions you had after that. So for example, my C-suite leader did that log and had a meeting with the board, and that board undermined her and didn't trust her opinion, and then went into a meeting with her director's team and in a way kind of lashed out. And so the director team wasn't aware of the board interaction. What they experienced was, wow, this C-suite leader is rude, cutting us off, it's negative again, and not realizing the weight that the C-suite leader was holding. And that C-suite leader wasn't aware that they were bringing in all of that negative energy from the board interaction to her team. So that log helped her make the connection between what frustrated her, what triggered her, and how that was then being basically passed on to the team. That's another great way to be aware of your emotional state and how that's actually creating a fearful team, a team that doesn't feel inclusive, where there's not psychological safety.
And it's interesting you say that, because you said feedback is scary. And I'm the first person to give my team feedback, but I rarely ask them for feedback. And it is scary. And it is something that I think for me, it's partly ego, it's partly control, it's partly how I'm going to take it. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I wouldn't have thought that feedback was scary until you challenged me to look at whether or not I even ask for feedback, which I probably need to do more often. So can you share an example of, I feel like there's a lot of organizations that face challenges on a regular basis, but you almost have to be committed to this, because it doesn't sound like it's something that you can go to a 1-hour training. You're like, yes, we're good, we're inclusive. But it sounds like there's always going to be struggle. There's always going to be conflict, and there's always going to be scenarios that I have to support as an organization to be equitable and to be inclusive. So do you have any examples of organizations that might have faced challenges, but also were committed to creating a better workplace?
Yeah. I actually, I had really a long relationship with a client. It's kind of like I knew about them for a long time, and then they reached out to work with me. So I was actually pretty excited because I knew of them. And when they reached out to me, it was because they really had a long history of doing DEI work, long commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, both in terms of their services, in terms of their public statements, even their branding, as well as their strategy internally related to diversity, equity, inclusion. So they hired me to help them build out their 3-year strategy for diversity, equity, inclusion. And when I came on board, and really got onboarded to learn about, what the past vision had looked like and where they were going to go. That's really where I always say you get more truth, because now you're contracted, the NDA is signed, you kind of get more into it. And in that, I realized that it was the struggle that they were facing was this. They were committed to doing DEI work, but there were also a number of other culture challenges that they were having to juggle at the same time, like incredible staff turnover. And they were having turnover by folks with marginalized identities. So women, Black people, Asian people. And so that is the D, diversity of your DEI strategy, right? They were losing diverse talent. Another thing is that they were, after doing some employee engagement surveys and focus groups, people were experiencing tremendous burnout. And so employees were saying, I don't even understand how we can be talking about an inclusive workplace and a really great place to work. That was a quote of the company. When we're burnt out, this doesn't even feel aligned. It feels fake. We're going to create a really great place to work that's inclusive, and we're burnt out and we've lost diverse talent. What do? This is a great place to work. We love this company, but also there's some real stuff that we got to address. And so, I asked the company, it doesn't feel aligned to do this DEI strategy and not address the harm and this conflict that's experiencing. And so, I always make jokes with my client, and I ask them to bear with me with the metaphor. And so I shared with them that I had just watched Poltergeist, this horror movie recently. And a lot of their director team's like, I know that movie. And I shared, like, most horror movies have the same foundation, right? That there's some scary burial ground, and then they try to build something good on the bones. And then they did that, but then, ghosts came or monsters or whatever. And so I told the client, you're trying to build something good, right? This future DEI, really good place to work strategy, but on top of the bones. And so we've actually got to address the bones, give them a proper burial, right? Do the repair so that the future work that you want to do, it's rooted on a solid, healthy, clean foundation. And so that's what we did. We actually did an employee engagement series to uncover what have been the harms. Like, let's tell the truth. And we did this in a space that was anonymous and confidential to start. So my team could really hold the harm and people could really be free with it. And then once we knew what was the harm that had to be repaired, then we could figure out, okay, what are the strategies? And then the visioning and the strategies was not anonymous. And the thing that was so amazing is like the CEO and the chief of people and ops told us, we have never had all of our employees coming together and share this openly. And we haven't experienced this, but it was because we did the foundational work of open communication and repair, and we built a container for psychological safety. And that's why in my own consulting framework, I always say we can't bypass the need to do this repair work as a part of strategy if we really want to have an inclusive workplace. So I would say that was a critical element for this client to build their 3-year DEI strategy with goals, to do this, to actually almost pause a bit and not be so focused on the strategy, the plan, and the future, but actually do some retrospective work and to listen to their employees and engage their entire workforce through different digital channels to help address this past harm and to not build on the bones.
That's crazy, because I heard you say the word harm, which I think you hear a lot about trauma and all these things, and you hear a lot about workplace trauma, but I think acknowledging that there is harm, and people are burned out and they can't get with the great place to work, the bumper sticker, because that's not how they feel. And acknowledging that they feel something differently is, I think a lot of organizations struggle with that. And then, so one of the other things, Krista, that I'm curious about is leaders. In my opinion, in my experience, leaders sometimes are hesitant to ask for help or request professional development, even asking for a coach, because they might not feel safe. They might not feel like I'm supposed to have it all together. People come to me, I'm the person. But what advice would you offer if they do need help? But they're kind of afraid to ask for that help.
I think that's so good. I remember when I was the senior director of an agency, and my CEO, who I reported to, and I was new to the role. Just for context, I felt very confident. And I know now, right, in retrospect, I had room to grow. I had learning I needed to do, as qualified as I was. And when my boss offered me coaching, it felt like a punishment. And that was just some of the culture stuff happening too. And so I was afraid to accept it. I now know that it wasn't punishment. It was actually an invitation and a lifeline for professional development and growth, to say that I didn't have to have it all, but because my past employer, other mental stuff I had going on, I was actually afraid to take the lifeline. And so I want to just offer that to say, sometimes it can feel like accepting coaching or seeking out training, particularly if it's not an MBA or, getting a PhD. Like, these kinds of training and coaching programs can feel like an admission of failure, or you don't know things that you should know. And I want to offer the story of this really dynamic chief people officer that I worked with. So in an organizational hierarchy, some people might have like a VP or a director of HR, and some might have a chief people officer who basically functions as HR, but also maybe talent as well. So in this organizational hierarchy, I had this dynamic, amazing CPO who was getting all of these calls and emails from directors across the organization and managers. And they all had a similar theme. This was around 2021. There were conflicts brewing on the team, but they didn't rise to the level of needing HR formal or legal intervention. But they were still conflicts or team disagreements, maybe some identity issues, right? A microaggression, a comment, just some, dynamics. I don't know another way to describe it. And the managers didn't have the skills or the knowledge of how to help their team members smooth it over, work it out, get resolution. So they did what they thought they should do, which was call the chief of people and operations. And so the chief of people and ops called me because I was on board, not even to coach her, but for a DEI strategy. But as a coach, this often happens when I'm in an organization, I'm just the phone a friend or the emergency 911 call. And she said, Krista, I'm getting all of these calls. People expect me to know what to do, but I'm not a conflict resolution specialist. I'm not an expert in navigating and resolving microaggressions because of racial identity or sexual orientation or disability discrimination. I do know if it was a protected class and it was a legal discrimination, I know what to do for that because I've been trained. But this other stuff, these cultural things, I don't know what to do. And I've got 15 directors who are asking me to come and help them intervene. I don't know what to do. And I feel so silly and I feel dumb. And I said to her, first of all, you're not silly. You're not dumb. Why would you know how to do all of this? It's a lot. I said, I've been trained as a conflict navigator. I've been trained in restorative practices, which is how do you basically mediate conflict and move to resolution, different practice. I'm a certified coach. So I work on harm reduction and healing. I have like 15 different certifications that have helped me prepare for the 15 calls that you've got. You don't have the luxury of all of that. So I offer that to say that first, we've got to release the pressure that we're supposed to know all the things, even when we have a position in leadership. That's such a dominant culture expectation that we should know it all. So first, I just want to release that pressure that we should have it all. It's why there's a whole field of consultants like me who get contracted to come and bring these specialized skills, because they are specialized skills that we have built our training around. So I think that's the first thing I just want to offer. And then there's just two more things I want to lift up too. I think when particularly a person in leadership says, there's an area here that I want to build my skills around, and I'm going to seek personal and professional development, it actually begins to model and signal that the company has a learning culture and that it's okay to build your skills and that it's encouraged. And that means if someone in leadership can do it, then someone who's maybe an emerging leader, maybe they're, an analyst or a coordinator who has their eye on leadership can say, oh, then I could admit that I need training and I want to grow in this area too. It gives permission is what I want to say. And then I think the third thing that I would offer is it also begins to show that we can make commitments together to create an equitable and inclusive culture. So I think I'll leave it there. I'm happy to answer any follow-up, but I know that was a long answer. I gave like 2 stories, but I feel really committed to the idea that we don't have to have all the answers, and that we do have to, make a commitment to continuous learning and growth.
So, and I agree. I think that's a fantastic way to model that it's okay to need support and it's okay to, and professional development and training has been around for ages.
Yes.
So I don't know why we have this stigma other than our ego or societal norms that we can't need help, but it's totally been around forever. So, but it sounds like that there's an equitable, inclusive workplace that comes from leaders, the organization, things like that. But it sounds like there's also a set of skills as a leader that I can have that help me do this better. Is that
Yeah.
right?
That is right. Yeah. So, I wrote a blog post in January after doing an analysis of, some university publications on leadership, and then also just periodicals like Forbes and Harvard Business Review. And essentially, when we look at how do you create an equitable and inclusive organization, we know obviously there's policies that get implemented like organization wide. So that's if you think of an organization as an ecosystem, yes, we have to have policies and structures in place that hold the organization together. And then there's the people. So all the employees have to abide by those policies, that we will not discriminate. We will do our best to live into the company values. So there's a role for people to uphold those cultures. And then there's leaders. Leaders play a critical role, and we need very specific skills as leaders. And these aren't skills. I put a post up recently and I said that, I believe that leaders aren't born, they're built. And somebody that I know personally texted me and they were like, I don't want to put this publicly, but I think people are born leaders. I was told my whole life I was a born leader. I was like, okay, but I do think we can disagree. And I think that we have skills we have to build, like leaders have to be effective communicators, right? If we have a vision for this is what equity and inclusion looks like, we got to communicate why that matters, why it matters to the company's bottom line, why everybody here has a role to uphold equity and inclusion. And we got to say it succinctly, and we got to say it to multiple audiences. That's a storytelling and communication function. And I'll tell you, I was a nerd in the 10th grade and high school on the speech and debate team. I've been building communication skills since 1992. And I know that it's a skill, right? How do you also do it in a succinct way, a compelling way? It matters. Leaders also have to be able to motivate others. So, and everyone is going to get motivated in a different way. So this is where we have to build that emotional intelligence skills, because if I've got a team of 40, what's going to motivate Xochitl may not be what motivates Marvin, but I've got to influence them to be able to abide by our inclusive team culture agreements. So how do I do that? I've got to lead and influence. So that's a very specific skill. There's a person that wrote a book called The Art of Gathering. And what she said in recently for her, when she was asked, I think by Forbes, what's the top leadership skill that leaders need in 2024? Of course, because she's about gathering meetings, she said it's designing and hosting, she said hosting meetings. And I go further, I say it's how do you design an actual agenda? Because most of the meetings that I get called to could have been an email, just to be totally honest. And the meetings don't factor in, if you have slides, have those slides been designed for folks with low visibility, low ability to see? Are your meetings being designed for folks that have different learning styles, right? Are they neuro-inclusive meetings? Are they interactive? Are they designed for participation, or are they just one hour long announcement, right? So I think designing and facilitating inclusive meetings is a critical skill. I'm trained in 8 different facilitation modalities. I have my own training methodology for facilitation, and I train my members in this too. And then the other thing too, I think ever since, Amy, I think Edmondson came out and talked about, psychological safety at work, it's been a buzzword, right? We want to basically be able to have, work environments where people don't experience harm and retaliation. But how do you actually do that? How do you actually create a work environment where people don't feel judged? They can feel like they can be who they are and that they don't feel retaliated against. That is a real skill. And part of it means if I have a team member, do they actually feel safe in my presence? And do they feel safe in a meeting that I'm hosting? Do they know that I will have their back in that meeting? That's a real skill that we train our members on. And I also teach my clients. But I think these are just 4, really critical leadership skills that you do not wake up and have. You have to intentionally develop those skills.
Okay. And I have to
I heard that sigh.
I'm thinking about all the gaps and I don't want to say deficits, but all the opportunities that I have to develop and learn and grow. So I guess my question is, and I know we're close to wrapping up, how do you support leaders in developing leadership skills or culture? Because I think there's so much that in my time that I've gotten to know you, you've helped me understand that there's so much that goes into just creating an environment that people actually even want to show up to, much less how I interact with them and how I engage with them, and not being aware because I've never thought about these things in this context. So how do you support leaders or organizations when it comes to DEI work? How do you support people to help get us in a better place?
Yeah, so there's a variety of ways that, I personally and my company help support folks. One is we provide free resources on LinkedIn. So if you've seen my posts, my videos, we're going live, even this, providing resources to really make, my friend jokes, democratize the data, right? But really to share the information publicly. And even on my podcast that we've had, there's a lot of great resources there. And then companies can hire my consulting firm, right? We provide on-site consulting services. An on-site can also be virtual, where they can hire us to help them go deep, because sometimes you need that thought partner who can come in, obsess, observe, and do the kinds of, say, harm repair work or strategy work that you're going to give those examples to. And then we also have our membership programs, which to me are the things that are really lighting me up right now. I'm going to put this ticker up. We have a program. We have two membership programs called the DEI Dinner Party. And we have another one called the Equitable Leadership Table. So the DEI Dinner Party are for anybody, any leader who is charged with supporting, guiding, or creating diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies at the organizational, departmental, or even team level. So you're trying to figure out, how do we create a plan? How do we create goals? How do we build organizational buy-in and help integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion in our culture? And we need a coach, a thought partner, someone that we can touch base with, every other week. That's the membership program for you. And then we have a training program, this 4-month, really dynamic curriculum that is specifically to help leaders build the skills that I just mentioned to you, from communication to psychological safe leadership to designing meetings. And also, what is your leadership style? Because we all aren't going to lead the same, and it should be rooted in who you are as a person. So the Equitable Leadership Table is a 4-month program that helps you build your equitable leadership skills and will help you build a healthy, positive, inclusive team dynamics. And I think one of the best parts of it, besides this online program, is that we'll culminate the program with an in-person mastermind retreat in Venice Beach, California. So you all can get yourselves to Venice Beach for a good old time in September. So those are just 2 ways that we are committed to helping leaders build the skills to create the kind of workplaces where we all deserve to work.
So is that a good place to start if I'm a leader, or are there other places that I should start? If my organization has a challenge, do I start with me or do I start with the organization?
That's a really great question. It really, there isn't, I would say, the best place to start, because there's so many other factors that go into what your entry point is, to be totally honest. So the entry point could be the organization. If the organization has, say, a central committee that's helping to lead and guide the work, you have organizational buy-in and budget, right? There's just a bunch of other factors that may decide, okay, this is how I'll know that I want to have our organization be the entry point. And the entry point could be you, if you say, I really want to be a better internal champion for equity and inclusion. but I know that I need to sharpen my skills. I got to be a better verbal and written advocate to tell better stories. I got to get my own team tightened up, because if I can have my team be the internal model, hey, this is what inclusion could look like. This could be a model that could replicate to other departments and divisions. So I want to actually start with myself and my team. So that could be the entry point. So there isn't a right or wrong way, I think, for your own individual choice. It just kind of depends on the other factors going on. These are the kinds of questions that we've been helping people field. If they have an interest in coaching or strategy support, they're welcome to reach out to me and my team to have a 15-minute call, and we can help you figure out what's the best placement support. For some clients, it could be the Equitable leadership table. For some, it could be the DEI dinner party. And for some, it could be a custom consultation support with the firm.
So I butchered the link. So I dropped the programs that I heard Krista said they have, which is the DI dinner party and then the Equitable leadership table. But one of the things that I want to just note, that if you go to those website pages, Krista also has a letter that you can use, I think, to help me advocate for myself, that I can take to my boss of why I need this development. So I think you're helping me take the burn out of going to ask for getting professional development money. Is that what are these letters that I have access to?
Yeah, actually, we just had someone use it, and I just got word this letter was so helpful. So most companies, even if they say they don't have the budget or the funds right now, what I have learned from last year and this year is that funds can be found if the case can be made. So what we've done is we've created, because we have 2 programs, we've created 2 letters that they're boilerplate letters on Google Docs that you can click the letter. You can customize it if you want it. So this is just letter, but a letter that you can use your own language and modify it. And then you can submit it to whomever the decision maker is in your organization. So it could be your direct supervisor, or it could be the head of training or HR. But it's essentially a letter where you're saying, I believe in creating inclusive workplaces. I want to build my skills in these areas, and here's why it benefits the organization. Because you're not building these skills in a bubble. You're not building these skills so that you can go and take a trip to Maui, although that sounds good. You're building the skills because you actually want to help that workplace be, as I said earlier, a really great place to work that's inclusive and equitable, and it can achieve that company's vision for change. Right. And the programs that we have will help you do that. And it helps you get custom coaching and consultation support really at a fraction of what it costs to hire a consultant outright. So I'll tell you straight up, by becoming a member of our program, it is about 5% of the cost of hiring my firm for a consulting engagement. So the letter actually says that, and it allows you to submit that and see if you can get professional development funds to basically get your company to cover your membership fees. And the last I'll say is that we were very strategic about how we priced our programs. We did an audit of the average professional development budgets. And so I know the value of our programs. We have both the live sessions and also training videos, e-courses, and what I call the pantry, which is a resource of the real templates and tools that my consulting clients have hired us to create, or that we've created with them. So you want to create a DEI plan? We have that. You want to have a demographic survey? We have that. There's something nerdy that people may not know what it is, but it's called a demographic heat map, and it's very expensive, but we have that inside of our pantry for you, and you can just download it on Excel and just use it. So we have all of these tools inside of our resource library, all of that for our members to be able to have and to use to do DEI and inclusive culture work inside the organizations right now, turnkey tools. But we decided to make the price what we did at under $3,000 because we wanted to make it accessible so that folks who wanted to build these skills and get these tools could do it in service of their organization. So I'm really excited about it. I think the program's amazing. I know the impact we've had on our clients. And so I'm excited to welcome in our new cohort.
That's awesome. And I think what I like about the program being timed out is some of this work is deeper work. So it's me being aware that I need to develop this skill, or I might be lacking in some area, and knowing that I can potentially have to work through this. And it might take me a little bit of time to retrain my brain, or be aware of the little things that I do that aren't the best fit for my team. So I love being able to have access and support, and not having to figure out how to sell the value to my boss. And I think just getting access to the pantry too, with all the things, is incredible.
Yeah.
And for those of you, just a real quick housekeeping thing. So we're about to wrap up. If you're watching this on the replay and you have any questions for Krista, LinkedIn does this weird thing and things disappear. So please make sure that you use the @ with Krista's name, so that she can find you and respond to your comment. Otherwise, you can always send her a message in her DMs and she can respond privately. But if you have a question during the live stream about anything that she covered, please tag her, because she won't see it if you just comment after we hop off. So I appreciate everyone that joined and stayed for the time. And if you joined late because you were tied up in a call, Krista dropped some nuggets in the very beginning. And if you're just joining us, please go back and watch the replay, because some of the things that she gave you, you can implement right now as a leader, or even as a person working for a team, and you aspire to be more, or you aspire to learn. There's tons of resources. So thank you so much, Krista, for taking the time. I'm super excited and a little bit jealous of your DEI dinner party, now your Equitable leadership table.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you. All right. Take care, everybody.
Okay. Bye.